All great movements are prone to degradation into tyranny. Words of Bernard de Jouvenel, a political theorist who studied how authority consolidates power over time. I find this quote oddly fitting in regards to the Separatist movement and the Confederacy of Independent Systems from Star Wars. The majority of people would most likely agree that the Separatist movement was, initially, a noble idea of independence from the greed and corruption of the Galactic Republic and the core. The state that was failing the Outer Rim for untold generations. The core took everything and gave back nothing. Slavery and piracy were rampant. Few, if any, calls for aid were answers, and corporations were allowed to create their own dominions over desperate planets of that region of the galaxy. Yet, for all the good reasons that the Separatist movement rose against the tyranny of the Republic, they ended up as even more tyrannical and corrupted state. The Confederacy wasn't, after all, against the corruption of the Republic. It was controlled by the very corrupt entities that caused so many worlds to separate from the Republic. A state controlled by corporations. That was more than fine with exploitation and slavery, as long as their coffers were being filled with wealth of conquered worlds. Corporations that, with their actions, proven one thing above all else. They cared nothing for the common good, only for the good of the corporations and their dark masters. Following on the success of my videos where I looked at the factions from Halo, we are now moving on to Star Wars, with a Confederacy of Independent Systems, being voted as the first faction to be discussed by my Patreon supporters. Today we shall explore why the Tau Empire and the CIS would be enemies. But before we begin, remember to like, comment, subscribe, ring the bell, the whole shtick. You know what to do. If you can, support me on Patreon to get access to a lot of additional content. I would appreciate it very much. With that out of the way, let's get started. Now, I would like to start this video with a big clarification and expansion on my previous argument. There is a difference between the Separatist movement and the CIS. I know some people might be surprised that I even need to specify this, but I feel like I need for those who come to a conclusion that because CIS was born out of the Separatist movement, it means they are the same thing. But they aren't. As the quote I started this video points out, great movements can degrade into tyranny, and that's exactly what happened with the Separatists. The noble idea to break away from the corrupted Republic was lost thanks to manipulation of Count Dooku, Darth Sidious, and corporate interest. Depending on when and where we would transport the Tau Empire into the Star Wars galaxy, we could see Tau not only support the Separatist movement, but even attempt to take control over it. After all, from Tau perspective, the initial Separatist movement was very much in the right, and some of those systems would be at least interested in the concept of a Tau Va. The Outer Rim was exploited, overtaxed, and unrepresented in the Galactic Senate. The promises and privileges of the Republic didn't exist in the Outer Rim. The Tau could exploit that for their own benefit, showing through word and action that their promises of a greater good weren't empty compared to those made by the Republic. As I already stated, slavery and piracy were rampant. World of Jabim is a great example of injustice of the Republic. A planet in the Outer Rim which was ignored despite the fact that they stayed loyal to the Galactic Senate for millennia. No aid was sent during the Brain Rot Plague. No forces arrived to save them from Trandoshan invasion. When Lithian pirates slaughtered Jabim citizens, no soldier and no Jedi came to rescue them. Only when it turned out that Jabim had an abundance of valuable ore did the Republic took notice. Suddenly, a full army and 28 Jedi could be sent to secure it. It's a shame, really, that the Republic didn't find half of those forces when Jabim and its people actually needed them. And you might think that this is an exception, an isolated incident. But is it? Zygerian slave empire, once destroyed by the Jedi Order, managed to rebuild and re-establish itself. The Republic ignored the enslavement of entire populations by the Hutts and Zygerians until during the Clone Wars that population was used as workforce for the CIS factories. Then they suddenly grew a spine. Then they moved to save the slaves, when they ignored the damn problem for decades, if not centuries, by that point. With all that in mind, I am more than certain that the Tau Empire, if they showed up around the Phantom Menace, or somewhere around that period, would support the Separatist movement. The Republic failed the Outer Rim, and the Tau would use this failure to grow their own influence and expand, just as they did with dissatisfied worlds of the Imperium of Man. But if we look at the CIS proper, I don't see the Tau signing a treaty with Count Dooku and numerous corporations that became the backbone of the CIS military might. And there are many reasons why they wouldn't be allies. The obvious one is that the Tau would see the corporations for what they are, the personification of a corruption in the galaxy, an enemy to the ideology of a greater good. Furthermore, unlike many dipshit senators and politicians, Tau wouldn't be blind to the fact that corporations not only control CIS, but kept their position in the Galactic Republic, which should have raised some red flags, but as we know, politicians in Star Wars see only what they want to see and ignore everything else. The Tau would most likely not suspect the Sith, as blaming everything on evil space magicians is a bit much, but I'm sure that they would suspect that the entire war was designated and initiated by the corporations to boost their own power and influence. Not to mention, they would be quick to realize that the intergalactic banking clan, who basically founded both sides of the war, would go bankrupt if they didn't have some kind of devilish plan or were intentionally manipulating both sides. The Watercast and the Ethereals would notice that and many more elements that don't add up, which would point to some kind of conspiracy or hidden corporate agenda, making them walk away from any deal with the CIS and Dooku. The Tau might like to use diplomacy, but they aren't half as stupid as some people like to think. The Watercast possesses a lot of experience in manipulation and social engineering. I suspect they would notice that there is something more at play with the corporate political takeover of the Separatist movement and creation of a CIS than meets the eye. So, with the explanation why Tau wouldn't ally themselves with the CIS before the Clone Wars even properly started, it's time to explain why this reluctance to join would turn into straight-up hostility. And the most important is, I do not believe CIS would leave the Tau Empire alone. The Confederacy was notorious for invading neutral systems for the sake of resources, manpower, technology, new routes for potential invasion, etc. They promoted conflicts, civil wars, terrorist attacks, everything to get a reason to send military force to secure what they wanted. We see it with a number of neutral civilizations and even members of a Council of Neutral Systems, like Mandalore. The CIS, under directive of Count Dooku and Palpatine, were more than happy to start conflicts with whoever they were pointed at. The Tau would be no exception, especially seeing how the ideology of the greater good is basically the opposite to the philosophy of a Sith. One could argue that technically the Republic could be manipulated to be the aggressor as well, but I think that a strike from the Confederacy is far more likely. In this scenario, the Tau Empire would be allied to the Republic, but that doesn't mean they would have representation in the Senate or any real power, especially if they were critical of the corruption within the Republic or supported the Separatist movement beforehand. But if they allied with the CIS, they would get a seat in their Senate, and with that, the Tau would have far greater potential to disrupt Sith plans. The Tau Empire, especially if they were present during the rise of the Separatist movement and before the formation of the CIS, could become a strong opposition to the influence of Count Dooku, something which he and Sidious couldn't allow. And so, the Tau Empire would need to be eliminated, or at least made into the enemy of the CIS, to ensure their influence over Confederacy was close to zero. That's my reasoning why I think the CIS would force the Tau to be their enemies. They would use whatever they needed. False flag, assassination, or hell, just the fact that the Tau would most likely keep diplomatic channels open with the Republic as pretext to attack them. They did so many times during the Clone Wars, and they are overconfident enough to try this again against a far more capable opponent like the Tau. With that obvious reason out of the way, let's get to more nuanced examples. The first I would like to point to are droids. Not that they use droids in itself, as technically using droids is far more humane than slave clone army, but the problem is the droid programming. Other YouTubers, Solar Sands with a video titled Why Battle Droids Deserve Better, and Pop Culture Detective in the video The Tragedy of Droids in Star Wars explored this subject far better than I could in a short video, so check them out, but I do have a few points to make here. For some unknown reason, the droids were programmed to not only feel fear, pain, and terror, but many of them are clearly sadistic and cruel. The Tau use AI in basically every sphere of life, economy, and military. And while their AI can show emotions and even experience sadness, they didn't program them to feel pain or terror like the programmers of the Star Wars galaxy. Not to mention the sadistic and cruel character of many CIS droids. We see it with the tactical droids happily using living shields to gain some kind of advantage on the battlefield, or commando droids relishing the slaughtering of their foes. This kind of thinking isn't just a bug, it's an intentional feature. Oh, don't get me wrong, the Fire Warriors can be cruel and brutal on the battlefield. Psychological warfare is something they are well versed in, but they don't use such tactics and strategies out of hand or because it's easy. There is still some moral compass in how they wage war, something which is absent in the droid army. The creation is always a reflection of the creator. Tau are well aware of that. So, if droids can be this cruel, how cruel are their creators? I am not even touching upon the disgust Earthcast would feel seeing that the droids were programmed to feel pain and terror, almost as if causing such emotions in artificial beings was for the pleasure of their builders. So yeah, the droids, how they are programmed and how they act, would give the Tau more than one reason to reconsider how they should treat the CIS. The second big reason I wanted to expand upon is slavery. The Tau abhor slavery, especially after their meeting with the Drukhari. Slavery is one of the greatest taboos in the eyes of the Tau and the ideology of a greater good. You can imagine their disgust when they would see both the Republic and the CIS use slavery on a grand scale. The clone army is a slave army in the eyes of a Tau. No Jedi talking about peacekeeping and how each clone is unique or that they are their friends would change their outlook on that. They are generals and slavers both, and the Tau would call them out on that. But for all that, the CIS would be just as disgusting to them, if not more, as the Separatists were more than happy to enslave numerous populations and work alongside slavers, like mentioned before, Zygerians. The Tau Empire wouldn't stand any act of enslavement, no matter how righteous the initial cause of the Separatists might be. That thing alone would ensure hostility between the CIS and the Tau Empire. The third thing that is worth to point out, or rather expand upon, is CIS disregard for neutral systems and populations that didn't want to have anything to do with the Clone Wars. Lurmen Colony on Maridon isolated itself from the rest of the galaxy, wanting to keep true to their pacifist ideas. The CIS saw this peaceful population as a perfect testing ground for the defoliator, a devastating weapon designed to kill all biological life while keeping the droids of the CIS safe. Such action would be unthinkable for the Tau. Testing such weapon on a peaceful population would go against the ideology of a greater good and couldn't be allowed. There are other examples. Torgutan population of Kiros, a neutral, pacifist colony, was sold to the mentioned before Zygerians. The Wookiees were the target for the CIS and the Trandoshians, who wanted to hunt the species and turn them into slaves. Pantora was blockaded by the Trade Federation, starving the world's population to force them to join the CIS. The CIS supported Deathwatch, a terrorist movement on a pacifist world of Mandalore. And I know Tau are well known for supporting radical anti-imperial movements in order to take over imperial planets, but they usually use diplomacy before that. And they don't tend to genocide, enslave, or invade neutral civilizations for no apparent reason or without attempting diplomatic action beforehand. So yeah, those are my main reasons why I think the Tau and the CIS would be enemies. And as before, it's time to put them against one another in a potential war scenario. But first of all, we need to consider where the Tau Empire even ends up if they get transported into Star Wars Galaxy, because that will influence relations with different factions. The Star Wars Galaxy is not only different in shape, but also a little bit bigger than that of the Milky Way. For the sake of clarity, if we overlap both galaxy maps and expect that the Tau Empire will be in similar geographic position, mirroring their placement in the Milky Way, we find out that our blueberry friends are in quite precarious situation, because they are uncomfortably close to the planet of Camino. Now, the maps I'm using aren't perfect and they don't overlap exactly, but as you can see here, the most probable placement is either basically right on top of Rishi system that guards the path to the Camino, or on top of Haipuri. For the sake of not overlapping territories too much, to limit the potential chaos of their appearance, let's say that the most northern Tau outposts are galactic south from the Molavar system, and the entire empire stretches all the way to the Haipuri. There are very few named star systems on the map there, and few populated planets. It's basically wild space, so transporting the Tau Empire into that region shouldn't cause too much narrative trouble. If we are going with this placement, the war becomes unavoidable. The Tau end up not only very close to one of the most critical planets for the war effort of the Republic, not only they are bordering both CIS, Republic and even Hutt territories, but also they are very close to the crossing of two major hyperspace lanes: the Mandra merchant route and Tyrellus trade route, both of which were important for this region of the galaxy. There is also a problem that they aren't that far from the Corellian Run hyperspace lane, and worlds like Ryloth, Geonosis, Christophis, and not insignificant for the Star Wars universe, desert planet of Tatooine. We can also point towards the industrial world of Rofana, where a lot of Republic military equipment was produced during the war, that is within this region as well. Additionally, let's make the scenario a bit less chaotic and assume that the Tau Empire was transported into the Star Wars galaxy around the Phantom Menace, to give them time to establish themselves, and even more importantly, to give chance for the hyperspace lanes to be established into their territories. If we transport the Tau into the Star Wars galaxy during the Clone Wars, or just before it, I don't see the Tau do little more than hunker down, close their borders, and turn into a Switzerland for a few years. Neither side of the war would push for the alliance, because the Tau would be a total enigma, so their potential as either enemy or ally would be unknown to them. And the same goes for the Tau and their knowledge of factions in Star Wars. They wouldn't take unnecessary risks. So let's give them this decade or so that all sides are aware of the Tau potential, and for the Tau to have a chance to either purchase or recreate hyperspace drive, so that they wouldn't be limited by their extremely slow FTL drive. With the Tau Empire located in this extremely important region of the galaxy, and with the time to establish themselves, I see both sides pushing them to join their side. For this video, let's go with the mentioned before scenario of CIS invading Tau territories, attempting to scare them into joining them, or screwing up some conspiracy or assassination attempt, revealing their schemes and making Tau declare them enemies of the Empire. Which would be a problem for the CIS, because the Tau Empire would be a powerhouse in the Star Wars galaxy. They are extremely militarized and possess a professional army and navy of significant size. Military that is far, far larger than the clone army of the Republic. Yes, even if we assume that units from the quote
200,000 units are ready, with 1 million more well on the way,
mean battalions, or hell, even full legions. Even then, the Tau Empire army has significantly larger numbers. On top of that, the average fire warrior is comparable with a clone trooper, if not better. I made an entire video about my reasoning on that, so check it out if you want details. They also possess superior hardware, actual military experience, and much better commanders than Jedi who were peacekeepers for 1,000 years. I can also point towards the Tau naval forces that can keep up with the navies of the 40k factions, so most Star Wars navies aren't that big of a challenge. But all of that are just minor points, because most important is this: the Tau Empire is a superb defensive faction. They have proven that many times over. Imperial Crusades, Orc Wags, Tyranid High Fleets, and many other threats that moved to destroy their empire were stopped or beaten back. This new conflict in a new galaxy isn't in a vacuum. The CIS still fights against the Republic. They wouldn't have enough forces to challenge the Tau Empire. Sure, the Tau Empire wouldn't be able to defeat them on their own either, but they don't need to. As I said, this war isn't happening in a vacuum. The only thing that the Tau Empire needs to do is to outlast the CIS. And we know that the Confederacy didn't last long, now did it? Now, some of you might still have doubts. Some of you might think that with enough numbers, the CIS could overwhelm upstart Tau. If you are one of those people, please let me introduce you to one of the Tau Empire super weapons. The Ice Fire Warhead, which is a massive EMP bomb designed to fry all electronics and cripple enemy infrastructure. On top of that, we see Tau deploy EMP strong enough to fry Space Marine armor. And that thing is resistant to the standard EMP pulses. You remember the EMP bomb that the Republic used on Malaster? The Tau Empire had that thing, and they used it more than just one time. In fact, they have many variants of such EMP-type weaponry, something that will prove to be extremely effective while dealing with droids. But you might say, stop, Hatter! This EMP warhead was used on the ground forces. What about the mighty Separatist Navy? Well, I could send you to my Tau Navy in a nutshell video, but I don't need to, because I have a better argument. See this? This is Tashiro Fortress Station. There are many variants and models of those, with bigger variants being described to house the population of a continent-size city. One of the few size statistics that I found indicate that Tashiro Fortress Station can be over 150 kilometers long. For the size reference, Death Star 1 was 120 kilometers wide, and Death Star 2 was 160 kilometers wide. So Tashiro is comparable in size to a Death Star. It doesn't have a planet-destroying laser, but does it need one if it's a defensive station? Its role is to stop any and all invading fleets. But please, enlighten me, how many warships can CIS spare to take down one of those? And if they do manage to destroy one, what will they do with the rest? Oh, yes, you heard me correctly. The Tau Empire possesses multiple of such stations. On this old map of the Tau Empire, referencing the period not long after the Damocles Gulf Crusade, which was the first proper war with the Imperium of Man, we see exactly 23 of them, with 19 of them belonging to the Tau Empire and the remaining 4 to the far side enclaves. On the newer, more modern map, the Tau Empire has 29 of them, and most of those were built on the other side of a star-tide nexus, so they are really new. How many ships can CIS spare to destroy just one of such fortresses? How many ships can the Confederacy spare to destroy just one of such stations? How long it would take to destroy one? And how would they deal with not only the defensive fleet accompanying the station, but also the reinforcements from the rest of the Empire? The Tau Empire might be one of the weakest factions in Warhammer 40k, but that doesn't mean they are defenseless against foes who can't even start to comprehend the might of the monsters they faced. There is a reason why the Tau Empire endured for centuries of basically endless war against the Imperium of Man and many other hostile forces of a grimdark galaxy. I am quite confident while saying that the Tau Empire could endure major CIS invasion of their territories. The same goes for the devastating potential of the Tau Empire military forces if they would be sent to support the Republic efforts against the Separatists on fronts across the galaxy. Even if the alliance with the Republic would only be a temporary and one crafted out of convenience. And nothing else. As I said, the Tau abhors slavery, and the Jedi are leading the Grand Slave Army of the Republic into battle. One can wonder if a war against the CIS really would be enough for the Tau to ally with the Republic. And on that ominous note, that most definitely isn't foreshadowing future videos, I think I will be ending this little discussion of ours. Before you leave, remember to like, comment, subscribe and ring that bell. If you can, support me on Patreon or through Ko-fi. I would appreciate it very much. Thank you for joining me, and I hope you enjoyed. Now, my dear viewers and listeners, remember, wherever you are, whatever you do, try to enjoy yourself while you can. I wish you most heretical day. Ta-ta!